Hello and welcome to Everyday Tarot, your daily dive into the divine wisdom of the tarot. I'm your host, Camille A. Saunders, and today I'll be talking about the usage of tarot in Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Whether you're a seasoned tarot reader or just starting to explore, this podcast offers daily insights, intuitive messages, and practical advice drawn from the cards. Each episode is designed to help you connect with your inner wisdom, find clarity in your decisions, and tap into the energy of the universe. Tune in every day, Monday through Friday, for fresh perspectives and empowering guidance from the tarot as interpreted by me. The best way to support the podcast right now is to listen daily, rate, review, and to follow or subscribe in your chosen podcast app. The next best way is to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/everydaytarot. I just added some new benefits, so if you join at the lovers level, you get the ability to ask tarot-related questions and I'll answer them on the podcast, and you'll be individually thanked by name on the podcast when you join that tier. And if you join the Witch Bitch level, you get early access to upcoming podcast episode topics, digital downloads I've created, monthly tarot hangouts with me and other listeners, as well as the opportunity to get an individual tarot reading live on the podcast. The link is in the show notes if you want to check out the Patreon. You can always go to my website, CamilleASaunders.com/everydaytarot for all the latest information related to the podcast and to find images of the cards I pull. If you're local to the greater Puget Sound area, I'd love to see you at one of my Let's Talk Tarot meetup group events where we all bring some of our favorite decks and play around with tarot and oracle decks together. Our next meetup is on March 10th at 5 p.m. at Township 20 in Sumner. You can use the meetup link to check out details on the upcoming events. All right, so we're into season 4 of the podcast. In the first season, I introduced tarot through talking about oracle versus tarot cards, myths of tarot, how to find a deck, reading for yourself versus others, and much more. In season 2 and 3, I went through all the major arcana cards and the 4 suits, one per episode. And in this season, season 4, I'm talking all about tarot in pop culture. So today, I'm talking about the usage of tarot in the TV show Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So a little bit of background on the show, if you haven't watched or haven't heard of it. It's an American supernatural horror TV show developed by Roberto Aguirre Sacasa for Netflix. It's based on Archie comic book series of the same name. The show ran from October 2018 to December 2020 for 2 seasons that were split into 4 parts. And it's centered on the Archie comic book character Sabrina Spellman, who's portrayed by Kiernan Shipka in the TV show. So it was in development in 2017. It was a companion to Riverdale, another Archie Comics series, and then the project got moved to Netflix. It's set in a fictional town of Greendale, and it's like a dark coming-of-age story that includes horror, fear, and witchcraft. So if you, like me, grew up in the 90s, there was Sabrina the Teenage Witch. It's sort of like that. That was also based off of the Archie comics, but this one's a little bit of like a darker telling of it. So Sabrina, she's raised by like her 2 aunts, and she has to reconcile her half-witch, half-mortal nature, and in this show, while fighting the evil forces that threaten her family, and the daylight world humans inhabit. So it's pretty dark and spooky, which is kind of fun. They talk about all different kinds of witch-related stuff. I know they had witches, real-life witches consult on the show, but it's pretty, like, satirical about the witch aspects of it. It takes it to an extreme, and there's a lot of sort of, I don't know, in the same way that like the Addams Family movies or show is like an inversion of like 1950s suburban families. It's a little bit like that, but with witches. So yeah, you can kind of think about that if you're interested. So I'm going to be specifically talking about an episode in season 1, part 2, episode 4 of the show, and it's called Chapter 15, Dr. Cerberus's House of Horror. And basically, a fortune teller comes to town. Dr. Cerberus's bookstore is like a sort of witchy store where Aunt Hilda, one of Sabrina's aunts, works. And this fortune teller comes in and she sort of offers for the day to give her services to the town. And she uses tarot cards to read the future for like 5 different of our main characters in the series, and it's like all takes place in one episode. And it's very interesting because there's sort of this element of the characters, they sit down with her, she sort of reads their cards for them, and you experience basically what would happen if like a lot of them are trying to make a decision, or they ask the tarot reader, like, oh, like Sabrina asks, can I trust him about her boyfriend? Someone else is like, has a decision to make. They're trying to decide if they're going to get eye surgery. Anyway, everyone's sort of trying to like make a decision or like has a question to ask of the reader. And what happens in the episode is that we basically like flash forward as the character as if like they follow one of the decisions. So they sort of make their decision in the moment. And we sort of see what would happen if they went that way. And then pretty much what happens is that each character, like when they see what's going to happen if they make that decision, they sort of change their tune and they decide to do something else. That's pretty much how it happens for all of them. And it is this sort of thing where they get a view into what would happen if they didn't like change their fate, or like if they sort of go with like I don't know, like their ego idea about what they want to do, sort of maybe without thinking about the consequences. And so it sort of plays out in the episode of like, oh, like what if, right? And then it goes down and you see what happens. And then they sort of flash back to them at the tarot reader's table. And she tells them, she actually says, like, to one of the characters, the tarot's just a mirror. Calm yourself. Our fates are not fixed. You still have a choice to make. And then basically each character goes on to decide, like, I'm actually going to maybe not take the easy way. I'm going to refocus on my values, and I'm going to take maybe this, like, harder path or the sort of harder decision to make. So we'll start with Sabrina. She's the main character. She comes in and again, she's in a relationship with someone. They go to this like magical school together. And she asks the tarot reader, can I trust him? And the tarot reader pulls the magician. The reader states, he is a handsome trickster which few women can resist. And Sabrina kind of goes on to be like, yep, that's true. And then she sort of like, then they pull another card and it's the Three of Swords. And the tarot reader says, pierce his heart. And generally the Three of Swords is seen as like a heartbreak card. It often, again, depicts a heart that's being stabbed with 3 swords. If you listen to, the last episode of Agatha All Along, you'll see that there's a lot of similar cards here. So someone else in that episode also pulls the Three of Swords. And it's this sort of like grief, sorrow, heartbreak card. So Sabrina sort of interprets this as like, oh, Nick, her boyfriend, is the magician. That he's like this sort of like trickster. And then the third card that gets pulled for her is the Tower reversed. And the tarot reader like doesn't necessarily say like what that card means, and then it sort of flashes forward to what would happen if Sabrina sort of went down this road of like not trusting her boyfriend. And in what we see happens is that there's this like talent show at school. She goes to the talent show. Her boyfriend Nick is a literal magician in the show, like in the talent show. And he sort of like tricks her, and she's really getting fed up with him. She still kind of thinks he's lying to her, that maybe he cheated on her. And so she sort of boldly like raises her hand and says like, I'm gonna like, hello, like, can I like, I want to participate in the act. And I guess if I haven't already said this, like, this is spoilers for Sabrina, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I don't think it talks about necessarily anything that's going to happen after this episode, but if you haven't seen it and you want to, maybe pause here and go watch up to this point. But anyway, so she sort of goes in this talent show. She questions him. He does this magic trick on her where he sort of like levitates her. And then the Weird Sisters, which are this group of three girls, that she's like sort of accusing that he is like still with or dating or flirting with them. And they use magic to kind of make it so that she can't come back down. So she just keeps like levitating and levitating off. And because she doesn't really trust Nick in that moment, she really freaks out. And Nick is trying to tell her, like, everything's fine, like, I'll get it figured out. And she just kind of like floats into space. And she's like, sort of like, it's very bad because obviously if you floated into space, it would be very cold and eventually you would die. And so that's sort of like the vision that she's given by the tarot reader. And then she sort of like zaps back into reality, back at the tarot reader's table. And she's like, okay. And later in the episode, she sort of talks to Nick, her boyfriend, and says, like, it's not that I don't trust you. I don't trust them. Like, can you just stay away from them? Spoilers, like, that doesn't happen, but she does start to trust him a bit more. Okay, let's move on to the next character. So this is Theo. Theo in the show, I guess I'll give a little bit of background on everyone, is trying to transition genders, and that's like a part of what they're asking about to the tarot reader. I don't think they really ask a question, but they show up. The tarot reader pulls the Knight of Swords. The tarot reader says, you're on a quest to find yourself, to seek the grail that is just out of reach. And Theo sort of asks, like, oh, like, will I actually get there? Like, will I be able to do, like, this gender transformation surgery that I want to do? And that's sort of like the Wheel of Fortune is the card that gets pulled. And so, again, their sort of vision of what would happen if they were to go down this route, if they were to not change their fate, is that they basically go and they steal a spell from Sabrina's aunt's house. One of her aunts is like an herbalist and uses a lot of plants and spells, and Theo makes this concoction on their own and does a ritual and does a spell that turns them into like a masculine presenting person, which is what they want. And they're very excited. And at first they have like a little bit of pain, and that's like not a good sign. And then we later sort of see that they're literally petrifying themselves into wood. Something went wrong with the plant spell, and they're like being turned into a plant basically. And they sort of try to deal with it at one point by requesting that Sabrina's aunt literally chop off their arm, because at that point that's the only part that like looks like it's turned into a tree. Again, this is a very magical show, so just like go with me here. And their dad consents to this, and they like chop off their arm because they really want to keep this like body. They've had a lot of gender dysmorphia. They really like how they look now as the sort of more masculine presenting, and they're like, I'll do sort of anything for that. Then after that happens, they're like, okay, like now I'm good, like everything's gonna be fine. My arm will heal, la la la. And then they like wake up one morning and like both of their legs have also turned to trees. So that's like their vision of what's gonna happen with these cards. And again, like the Knight of Swords, like again, you have a knight. So if we think about the Knight of Swords, I'm going to look in my book Fearless Tarot by Elliot Adam, How to Give a Positive Reading in Any Situation. They talk about the Knight of Swords as being a card about slowing down. The Knight of Swords is ambitious. They're striving to prove that they're a successful adult, but almost no matter what happens, they can't seem to be happy. The only thing they know how to do is push ahead. Once they've completed their objective, they don't know how to absorb it. And there's this sort of question of like, are you rushing through life? Like, are you enjoying the things you have? and it is a little bit of like a chaotic. If you look at like the depiction of the card, it sort of looks out of control. Like the person on horseback is very determined. The horse kind of feels like it's looking at them like, is this a good idea? And the person is just like charging on. And I think that's very sort of what's happening to Theo in this episode. They're thinking about, oh, what if I just do it anyway, right? Like, I really want this thing. I can't necessarily, like, there's no one, they talk about that there's no one in town, like, no doctors that can do the surgery that they want. And they are feeling impatient about it. And they sort of get this idea of, like, oh, like, the Spellmans, I can just use magic to do it. So that's sort of that card. And then the Wheel of Fortune, right? Again, if you think about like the game, the Wheel of Fortune, or like when you spin a wheel, like a prize wheel, you don't really know what you're going to get. Right? You're hopeful that like it's going to be something good, but there's also this aspect of like, like you're putting your faith in something and you're not quite sure how it's going to turn out. And so it's seemingly like that's sort of what happens in this vision of theirs. They kind of get the body they want, but it's at this great cost, which is pretty extreme, right, in the episode. But it's sort of this idea that, okay, like by just pushing forward and doing it anyway and stealing something and like using magic that you don't really know how to use, like bad things are going to happen. And so ultimately, so Theo sees that vision. They're like, oh my gosh, no, I don't want to like turn into a tree, literally. And so they decide like, okay, maybe I can wait on this, or like I don't really want to steal this thing, or like, okay, maybe there's another way to do this. The next person that comes, or that the tarot reader finds, the tarot reader like leaves the store and goes and finds them, is Roz. Roz is one of Sabrina's friends, so is Theo. They're all like high school students. And Roz has recently lost their vision. In the show, Roz can like see, like gets visions of the future also. And the tarot reader sort of like says something like this. They say, you're a very cunning woman. And then they sort of like make a joke about like, well, I don't really have any business like telling you what's going to happen, or like showing, like you can see things already. So they have this like literal, they can't see, but they've lost their like eyesight, but they have these visions of the future. And we learn later in the show, spoilers, but that like Roz comes from a family of people that can see the future. She doesn't read tarot necessarily, but she gets like literal visions. And so Roz asks the tarot reader, okay, like I have this decision to make. The tarot reader says, the cards are telling me you feel guilty about something. Roz admits, like, yeah, I have this decision to make. And she's trying to decide if she's going to get eye surgery to hopefully fix her vision. She recently lost it, so she wants to see again. And her dad is like a minister at the church and is going to solicit money at the church to hopefully cover her eye surgery, which we later find out is something that she feels guilty about. She doesn't really like that her dad does this, or feeling like this is pity, or she doesn't really like that she's going to be like be indebted, or that she's a little skeptical of like where the money is coming from and if her dad's being truthful about things. So her vision sort of, again, just like some of the other characters, flashes forward, and we get this where she goes ahead, she gets the eye surgery, she can see again, everything's great, she's so excited, she like sees her boyfriend and is just enjoying like seeing him again, with her eyesight and all these things, and she's still sort of feeling weird about it, and so someone tells her like, oh, like maybe you need to like give back to the community, like maybe that will help you feel better. And so she goes and seeks out this volunteer position where she's going to go hang out with another person that's lost their eyesight. And she goes there, and the person basically tells her that she stole her eyes, that her dad like gave money to someone to carve out her eyes. It's all very morbid. This is sort of a horror show. So keep that in mind. But Roz is obviously horrified by this. Like, she's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, that would never happen. When she sort of like flashes back out of the episode, like out of the vision to the tarot reader. And that's sort of when the tarot reader says, like that quote that I said earlier, the tarot is just a mirror. Calm yourself. Our fates are not fixed. You still have a choice to make. So Roz moves forward and says, like, okay, like, I don't want my dad to solicit money from the church. I'm going to try to find a different way to get the money for the eye surgery, or maybe it's just like, I'm not in a rush. It doesn't need to happen right now, because she sort of doesn't want him to go about this in the way that he normally would. And she's becoming a little bit more accepting of both her gift of visions, but also that, like, she has lost her literal eyesight. Okay, we have 3 more people that come in. So Zelda is Sabrina's other aunt, and Zelda is a bit of a tarot skeptic. The tarot reader comes in, and Zelda, or she sort of overhears Zelda and Hilda, so Sabrina's other aunt. They are talking. Zelda's about to get married, and so the tarot reader says something like, "Oh, like, you have a decision to make, or you're feeling like something stands between you and the altar, like la la la." And Zelda's very skeptical. She's like, "Yeah, okay, you overheard me talking about a wedding, like, duh, like." Like, that's not fortune telling. And Zelda's a bit of a skeptic about everything, so this sort of fits into her character. But then the tarot reader pulls the high priestess, and Zelda says, "Oh, like, that looks nice." She says, "Well, how very fitting, because Zelda's about to marry someone who is like the priest of the Church of Night, which is their like satanic cult thing that they all practice." So she's about to marry Faustus, who is the priest, like the high priest of this, the Church of Night that they attend, worship, go to school for, stuff like that. And so she's like sort of literally going to become a high priestess if she marries him. But she's feeling some, like, she's not quite sure why, but she's feeling concerned about their impending marriage. And then the tarot reader says, like, something stands between you and the altar, an obstacle. Zelda asks, what kind of obstacle? And the tarot reader says, a secret, and then pulls the Hermit card. And Zelda does not like the look of that card. And the Hermit is usually about, again, like, withdrawing from society or from a situation, going off and sort of like learning something, and then coming back into community and sharing that information. It's not just about the isolation aspect or like hermiting yourself, but it's also about this, like, you go and learn and then you kind of come back and share that. And there's like a complicated plot line that we already know about in the show, but basically the high priest had a baby at some point, I think with Zelda, and he doesn't know it. And so Zelda wants to keep that information from him, and she basically like gave the baby away. I think she wasn't, I don't quite remember, this was in like an earlier episode, but she gave the baby away to this other person named Desmelda, I think, like an old witch. And basically in this vision that Zelda has of like, oh, if I continue down this path, she finds out Desmelda, instead of caring for the child, ate the child. Again, this is where we get the like sort of horror irony of the show, right? Where like witches eating babies is like part of the witch mythology that gets spread around. So Desmelda ate the baby, and Desmelda basically blackmails Zelda and says that, like, if you trying to remember. I think she wants to come to the wedding or something like that. And Desmelda basically blackmails her and says, like, oh, if like you don't tell him or if you don't invite me, then like I'm gonna tell Faustus, the person Zelda's getting married to, that you like took away his daughter and gave it to me, and like he doesn't even know all this information. Zelda decides, okay, maybe that's like worth it. And so she says, okay, fine, like I'll let Desmelda come to the wedding. Desmelda is trying to like get with Faustus at the wedding. Zelda's upset, and but Desmelda has this information held over her, right? And Zelda can't quite handle it because Desmelda is like basically by eating the child, like embodied her. She like stole her youth, basically. And so Zelda is like grossed out because basically Desmelda is the high priest Faustus's daughter, and he's like making out with her. And that's what's happening when Zelda sort of snaps back to reality and realizes like, okay, like I don't I think she sort of decides like ultimately like I don't know if I want to go forward with this. Like, if we have this secret between us, like, I'm not quite sure what to do. Either, like, I want to keep the secret from him, and then maybe I'm not going to end up being with him, or like something else has to happen. I can't just like have this sort of obstacle secret in between us, where she did this thing that she thought was like for the greater good, but it might come back to bite her. All right. So we have two other folks and then one other card after that, but that will be a short one. So we have Harvey. Harvey is Sabrina's like hometown ex-boyfriend. She was dating him at the beginning of the show, not anymore though. Now she's dating Nick, who is a magician and a witch or a warlock and goes to the school with her, the magical school. And Harvey is also, he's sort of like not really into this whole witchcraft stuff, but he, right, is around these other folks that are, so he sort of believes it, but he's a little skeptical himself, or he doesn't quite know how he plays into it. So Harvey pulls the Fool as the first card, and in this episode, all the cards that they pull like sort of look like them, like the character. So he pulls the Fool, and he sort of like rolls his eyes and is like, "Oh, great, that's me. Like, I'm such a fool." Right? Like sort of this literal interpretation of the card. But of course, the Fool is about like being at the beginning of a journey and sort of what could happen there. And the tarot reader, and then she pulls the Hanged Man, and Harvey's like, "Ooh, I don't like the look of that." And the tarot reader says, "You hang between two futures, one here at home and one far away." So we learned that Harvey recently got a letter of acceptance into an art school. Again, these folks are like in high school, so he's considering whether to go away to this art school, leave the town and go away. So that's the part of one at home, one far away. But he's dating someone, he's dating Roz, who's in the community. And so this is also part of the conflict of like, oh, okay, like I don't know what I'm gonna do. And then he sort of sees the vision of what would happen if he did leave home and go to this art school. He basically gets paired with a roommate that is having demons come to him at night, and he's drawing them and he's like doing all this art. And Harvey basically realizes that like, oh, this guy at school is seeing a lot of the like witchy things that I've seen in my hometown, and they're real. Like he's not making this up. Like he's drawing things that are real. And Harvey, what ends up happening is that Harvey sort of confronts him about it, and then in the next like scene, the roommate is literally like hanged from the ceiling, which again is a very like literal interpretation of the Hanged Man. Usually the Hanged Man is hung by the foot, not like around their neck, so in a way that would not generally kill you. Obviously it wouldn't be great, but generally it's depicted as a person like hanging upside down in a tree with their head towards the ground and like a foot somehow attached, like usually with rope, to the tree. And so this is maybe a little bit where like the cards get a literal interpretation and not so much like how I would think about the cards. And then let's see. And then Harvey gets pulled the Ace of Pentacles. And I think it happens before it, but the tarot reader tells him. So when he sort of snaps back to the present, she tells him, "You will suffer for your art, but you need not leave home to do so. You will dig deep to unearth your true calling. And then the Ace of Pentacles gets pulled. And the Ace of Pentacles, so aces again are generally sort of about the beginning of something, very prosperous beginnings. The Ace of Pentacles, a wealthier state of mind, positive thoughts. It's a gateway into new opportunities. So it's sort of interesting because in the TV show, they didn't actually get a final season as I think was scripted to happen. So I was looking it up, and there were some theories online that this sort of idea that he hasn't reached his calling, like in the show, he and his family are like miners, like dig in the earth miners, and he's sort of again torn between like this doing this manual labor profession that he and his all the men in his family have done for ages versus being like this artist that he really wants to be. He doesn't quite see himself as a miner. But it's interesting that there's this sort of like literal digging deep to unearth your true calling, like it's called out in the episode. And people have said that part of the final like arc of the show was going to be that Harvey was going to somehow save Sabrina by going and confronting these like demon things that are in the mines. It didn't end up playing out. Sabrina actually goes into, again, spoilers, but into the void, which in one of my tarot decks is the Fool card is called the Void. So again, you can think of it as like, it's like limbo space sort of, or like a black hole, where it's like nothingness and also everything. And that part of Harvey's like character arc was that he was going to be able to somehow pull her out of the void. Again, this didn't end up happening in the show because the season got canceled and we didn't get to see that play out, but apparently there were scripts that were written and that this was part of potentially Harvey's journey. So this was maybe alluding to like a future that didn't quite end up even happening like in the show, in the Ace of Pentacles there, but sort of this idea of like, okay, his opportunities coming. And then we have Ambrose is the next character and the last one that gets like a full reading. Ambrose is Sabrina's cousin. Loosely, I think they're not actually related, but that's like the role he plays in the show. And the first card that gets pulled for him is the Hierophant. And that card is sort of about institutions, and sometimes it's depicted as the Pope. And Ambrose is also trying to sort of make this decision about if he's going to serve Faustus. And Faustus is again the priest of the Church of Night. But again, he's sort of feeling like this concern and he doesn't quite know what it's about. Ambrose is. So when the Hierophant gets pulled, he's like, cool, okay, like, I think that's like about me. I'm trying to make this decision of like, do I sort of like go down this path of, basically like committing himself to the Church of Night and being under Faustus's like command. And then the card that gets pulled is the Devil, and Ambrose says something like, "Oh, that's more like it." And I think he's sort of alluding that like Faustus is the devil, because again, he's sort of like the leader of the Church of Night, which is kind of this like witch satanic church, and yeah, and Faustus, even his name, right, like has all these allusions to, anyway, and that in other sort of like mythology, Faustus is like this, sells his soul like to the devil in exchange for magical powers. And so that definitely gets woven into the show that Faustus is sort of willing to do anything to get power. And so the vision that Ambrose sees is that if he commits himself to Faustus, that Faustus is going to sort of, he like, I don't know, does some blood oath or something. So he has to do whatever Faustus says, if this were to come true. And Faustus is going to demand that he kill all the Spellmans. So that includes Sabrina and her two aunts, which are basically like Ambrose's only family, the only people that have ever really like cared for him and been nice to him. Other than his boyfriend, Lucas, and he also sees that there's something that happened with Lucas and Faustus that is fishy. So again, the tarot reader pulls the Hierophant, he pulls the Devil, and then Ambrose asks, like, what does this have to do with Lucas and I? Because I guess that was what he wanted to know from the tarot reader. Lucas was like his boyfriend, and Lucas has like gone missing recently. And this is sort of what ends the tarot reading, but the tarot reader pulls another card and like doesn't show it for a little while and says, I think in this case, perhaps not knowing is better. And Ambrose freaks out about that. The tarot reader, he like takes the card from the tarot reader and wants to see it. And when we see it, it is death. And we see this later in the episode, but he basically goes to Faustus and sort of asks, like, what happened? And Faustus says, like, Lucas is no longer with us. Do you want to, like, take his position, which was with Faustus, like, to work underneath him? And so Ambrose is basically given this deal with the devil that's proposed in this episode, and he's sort of realizing that Faustus does not have good intentions, which is concerning because the Aunt Zelda is about to marry Faustus, so this has greater implications for the show. And then we get to the very end of the episode, and the tarot reader, whose name is Mrs. McGarvey, in the episode, she like leaves the witch shop and she kind of goes home, and then we see her and she like takes off this glamour, which just means like she was wearing like a magical disguise. She takes it off and she's revealed as who in the show we know as Mrs. Warwell, who is one of Sabrina's teachers at the school, but is actually Lilith or Madam Satan, and she pulls the Empress card for herself. And that's how the episode ends. And this is like this whole greater arc in the story of that we find out that Lilith is basically a character in this world, and basically, again, spoilers, but we find out in the end that like, really we should be on her side. She's trying to groom Sabrina to like marry Satan, basically, to become the next Madam Satan. But Sabrina doesn't quite know it. So she's meddling in all these different ways. And so basically the conclusion of this episode is like, oh, okay, here she is, like meddling again in Sabrina's life. And that she sees herself as the Empress, which I think is supposed to sort of imply like what we find out later, which is that like the Emperor is Satan and she is the Empress to his Emperor, ruling over hell, basically. But again, she sort of sees herself as this like great mother, like a nurturer, like, right, she's sort of meddling or overseeing Sabrina's life and trying to guide her down a certain path. We get glimpses of it throughout the show, and in the beginning we really see her as like an evil character. But as she goes on, we sort of start to realize that she is trying to guide Sabrina towards like her best interests, or at least what she thinks her best interests are. And I guess I forgot to say earlier, but when the card that Roz gets pulled is the Justice card, which is usually a person that has a blindfold on them. So because she's the one that was trying to make the decision about getting eye surgery and losing her sight. So again, all of these cards are very like on the nose for the characters. Again, some of them taken in a more literal, like what does the art look like of the interpretation versus sort of the greater meanings of tarot. But I would say maybe it's like a 7 or 8 out of 10 on the scale of like if 0 is like a totally inaccurate representation of tarot and 10 is like accurate. I would say like Agatha all along is probably like a 9 out of 10. It's pretty good. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is more like a 7 or 8. I think they do a decent job depicting it. I think they just go with a slightly more literal interpretation of it. But they do show the traditional Rider-Waite cards in the episode. They show like the cards that they pull, which is pretty cool. And sort of like the lessons that we learn from this episode. So again, the tarot reader talks about like the tarot is just a mirror. Our fates are not fixed. You can still have a choice to make, which is definitely how I feel about tarot. I don't necessarily feel like tarot is this thing of like, this is set in stone. It's like, okay, like maybe this could happen, or it's this mirror of like what you're thinking and kind of the what if, and then like, what are you going to choose to do with that information? And again, like the tarot reader in the show gives each character a view into what would happen if they don't change their fate, or if they kind of go down the path that they're going down. And basically it makes each character question their motivations, if they're taking kind of the easy way, and to refocus on their values and take the path less traveled in the end. So let's dive in and see what the cards have to say today on this topic. Okay, so I pulled from the Anima Mundi deck by Megan Wyrunden, and I pulled the Ten of Cups reversed. So the Ten of Cups generally is like happiness, joy, family, satisfying romantic relationships, true to yourself, clear set of values, adjusting your life accordingly, like harmony. So reversed, right? It's going to mean a little bit more of like, that's feeling challenged, or maybe some broken relationships, some misaligned values, some work-life imbalance, which I think is interesting because I feel like that's what's happening in the TV show, is that there is sort of this like imbalance that's happening, that we're sort of, as the audience, like keen to, or we get sort of illuminated to us. I am going to look in the Fearless Tarot book to see what they say about the Ten of Cups reversed, just to see if there's any other information. It says it symbolizes the importance of color in your life. The rainbow is at the foundation of the card. Colors have a tremendous effect on our moods and influence our unconscious thoughts. The Ten of Cups reverse suggests you may need to bring back some magic to this moment. If you've been experiencing tunnel vision, it's time for you to stop and step out of your routine. Brighten up your environment, buy some flowers, rearrange the furniture, treat your environment to light and color. If you've been indoors for too long, it might be time to step outside. Approach the world with wonder and openness to the magic at play. That also makes me think about how, at least here where I am, we're entering sort of springtime. It's probably still a little bit of like a false spring. We're probably still going to get some cool weather ahead in the Pacific Northwest with a pretty long springtime, often till like mid-June. So, but I've seen the signs, right? I see buds. I've seen daffodils come up this week. We're getting some warmer weather right now, almost in the 60-degree Fahrenheit. So I'm sort of getting this message of like, hey, okay, maybe it's time to like come out of hibernation, right? Or like sort of mix up the routine and kind of see if there's been anything where you've been feeling stuck or just kind of set in your ways, and to mix it up. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today on Everyday Tarot. Just a reminder, the podcast comes out daily, Monday through Friday for all of 2025. All right. See you soon. Bye-bye.